sometimes you just get hot, right? That's just the way it is. And I was laughing, so it should have just kicked in, so that should be good. Brother Hayes, glad that you're here. Brother Singletary, I don't think you got a new paper. You got this one on the prodigal son? I don't know if you got that one. Okay, and I don't know that you all do. Anybody else need one tonight? Okay. Yeah, y'all pray for everybody. All the baseball games were rained out, so that's where Sister Hay is tonight. That's where Donna is tonight. So they all get to play tonight. And Brandon hadn't lost a game, and she called me a little bit ago and said they were losing 4-1. And, of course, you know who's going to get blamed? Me. It'd be all my fault because I wasn't there. It's kind of how that works sometimes. But I'm glad that you're here tonight, and we've been talking about the lost son. We talked a little bit about the sheep and the coin, and then we started last week. We're all the way down to number 2. And one of the things that we talked about last week, just to kind of get us back going, how many know that sometimes we got to be careful about things? And what Brother Hay means by that is, how many know you can really get yourself in trouble when you think you know what you don't know? Does that make sense? So we talked a little bit about that last week, and of course we're going to talk about the younger son now. But just remember this, the elder one wasn't doing so good either. And we'll figure that out as we get a little bit further along in our Bible study. But I'm excited. Tomorrow's your last day, right? Woohoo! I told him, I said, okay, graduation from high school, time to adult. How many know sometimes about 4 years from now, I'd be saying, man, I should have slowed down in high school, right? Not stayed 4 more years, but, just enjoyed it a little bit longer, right? Because how many know that once you get to that point, life begins to change? So, and it's kind of that time of year right now when people are graduating, all those kind of things are going on, and kids are all about their sports. We have all those kind of different things going on. But let Brother Hay just tell you something. Life never slows down. You can try to slow it down. Sister Hay finally admitted that her shipping and handling caught up to her. So she wasn't 29 this year. She would have been 29 for the 40th time. I think she wore that out. So she had to do something different. But I laugh a little bit because Brother Singletary and I were talking this morning, and I told him, I said, it's a bad thing. We lived long enough to get old. But how many know I'm glad I lived long enough to get old? Right? Have you ever thought about some of those things? It's easy to get caught up and complain and be upset about things. But in my devotional this morning, I just want to share this with you. This is what it said. He said, imagine if I told you that you could do whatever you want, have anything you want for 24 hours, but you had to endure 1 millisecond of pain in order to receive that reward. How many people would take him up on it? A millisecond, we'd be like, man, I can do that, stand on my head. Blink your eye. Boop. That's less. A millisecond's less than that. Have you ever thought about that? And no matter how long we live in this life, if we live to be 125, it's just a millisecond in comparison to eternity. And sometimes we lose sight of that. And don't ever think Brother Hay is making light. People's pain is real. People's hurting is real. People's suffering is real. Sister A and I were talking about the young man. I said, there's probably a lot of things going on in that little guy's life, right? And sometimes we might not even be able to recognize them. But all of a sudden, you got to be careful, because how many know you can't just let somebody go along that way? Right now, it was cutting tires and breaking windows. What if it was beating people up or stabbing people instead of tires? Make sense? So sometimes there has to be a check and balance over situations that we come across. But it doesn't mean that we can't have mercy and do the best we can to try to make it have a positive outcome. Does that make sense? And so what I'm telling you is, even in your own life, when it looks the darkest, always remember this. Morning's coming, right? Think about how bad it looked that Friday during the first Easter weekend. Things looked pretty gloomy on that Friday. But how many know when that sun rose on Easter morning, how many know everything changed? All of a sudden, the sun began to shine, and I'm not talking about our sun that's hanging in the sky, right? I'm talking about as Jesus rose, and all of a sudden, everything that we're involved in, we're now in a different place than we were then. And so we need to remember that, and don't get discouraged. Now, that's easy to talk about. So we're on number 2, and it says in Luke 15:13, and it says, "And not many days after, the younger son gathered all together and took his journey into a far country, and there wasted his substance with riotous living." Now, I think this is kind of nothing new under the sun. It's kind of amazing, Brother Hay, how sometimes we get people that come up and say, "Oh, this is a new thing." How many know not too many new things really out there? Now, don't get me wrong. How many know AI is definitely a new thing? How many know all this computer stuff is definitely a new thing? The jobs that Brother Hay used to do, the things I used to work on, man, they're in museums now. That's scary. I mean, one of the airplanes is hanging over there by McDonald's. And every time I go by, Kaylee says, "Hey, did that plane ever fly?" I'm thinking, yeah, it flew. If you ever get a chance, you'll see it has a lot of campaign medals on it, all the way dating back to the Vietnam era and coming all the way through the Gulf War and all those kind of things. But how many know they haven't flown those for a very long time? Things change. And I think about how our kids are growing up now. We were talking about it before church. How many of our kids can tell you their phone number? Have you thought about that? How many of you know people's phone number? I know you hit, my kids, they hit Papa or Dad, and that's how they get a hold of me. They don't know my number. They just know my spot, okay? I'm not going to lie. When it comes to Don and Michael, somebody would call and say, "Hey, you got Michael's number?" I go, "Wait a minute. I have to go in my contacts and look it up." I don't have it memorized anymore, right? How many know things have changed? And unfortunately, no matter how much we want to go back, we're not going to. I promise you, it's just like graduating from high school. At some point, people say, "Man, I wish I could go back there." Okay, you can ask his mom and dad. They probably thought that a couple of times in their life. They said, "Man, things were a whole lot easier then." But how many know you can't go back? But you know what Brother Hay is glad about? I'm glad we can't go back. And you want me to tell you why? Because we never remember the past like we ought to. It's really funny to me, but a lot of people think, well, I was better off, and they fill in the blank. They forget about all the trouble that went along with what was going on back then in their life. Make sense? So sometimes we got to be real careful, because the enemy always wants you to do this. So this young man is in this situation now, and he's decided, okay, I'm going to take all my inheritance, and I'm going to leave. I'm going to leave my dad's house. Man, his dad's a lot nicer than me. I tell you, I had that discussion with one of my kids. Well, I'm just going to move out. Okay. And they start packing up stuff. I go, whoa, wait a minute. I pay for that. That's not going with you. That stays here. What do you mean that don't go with me? That's mine. He said, "Oh, no. Did you pay for that?" "No." "Well, then it's not yours. It's just on loan." Right? It's almost like having a rental. And I would tell them, and all of a sudden, they start thinking about it. Well, okay, I'm just going to go over to my friends. I said, okay. I said, "Oh, I forgot. You got to give me the keys back to that vehicle." "What are you talking about? That's my car." I said, "Do you pay insurance? Did you pay for the car?" No. I said, as a matter of fact, is your name anywhere on that car? No. Well, I guess you're going to have to leave it here. But it's so far to their house. I said, I don't know what to tell you. Call them up. Maybe they'll come give you a ride. All of a sudden, a reevaluation begins to take place. And all of a sudden, things that seem so bad aren't quite as bad as what they think they were. Make sense? I remember probably the hardest one for Brother Hay was my oldest daughter one time. She let me know that, she didn't need her mom and dad anymore. She had this thing covered. She's going through a real dark time in her life. She already had a baby and went through a divorce, just had a lot of stuff going on, right? And she just looked me right in the eye, and her mom said, hey, I don't need you guys. Okay. I'll never forget. I said, just remember one thing. I said, all those friends that you got right now, I said, when push comes to shove, they're not going to be there. Oh, yeah, they will. And I remember she got herself into a situation. How many know it always involves the opposite sex? Sometimes it's a girl, sometimes it's a boy. It don't matter, right? And I remember she got herself into some trouble, and she found herself standing before a judge. And she had written some checks that she didn't write them. The other person wrote them. You know what the judge said? Whose name's on those checks? All of a sudden, I know all the things that I told her over the years started coming back into her brain. And, of course, she was crying. And then I love what the judge said. He looked her right in the eye and said, well, you could just dry up the tears. That's not going to work, young lady. We got an issue. And all of a sudden, the checks were high enough that she could have went to jail. That's what he told her. What are you going to do? and the judge asked her straight up, is there anybody here with you? And it was just Dad. But she didn't want to say Dad was there. And she's looking around. And I'm thinking to myself, well, some lessons have to be learned that way. Scary. How many know we don't want our kids to learn that way? And the judge asked her, well, who's that guy? And you couldn't even hear her say it. Well, my dad. And he called me up there and he said, what are we going to do here? I said, well, I don't know. She told me she didn't need my help. She had all these friends. I don't know where they're at. I said, I've been looking for them since I got here this morning. I said, I don't see any of them. He said, well, I don't have time for this, so are you going to do something or what's going to happen here? Because there's only two choices. Either she pays this money right now or she goes to jail. How many know all of a sudden we start having a different realization? We took care of it, obviously. I didn't let her go to jail. But my point is, we do that with God all the time without even recognizing it, right? God has provided things for us. He's been there for us, and he'll tell us what we need to do. But how many know we don't like to listen sometimes? Well, we got to be our own boss. We got to do all those things. One of the hardest things for any guy, and I'm picking on us guys because I am one, okay? The hardest thing for any guy to admit is somebody else is in charge. I'm just telling you the truth. Now, we did find out the other day that ladies don't follow directions any better than us guys. They just like to give us grief about it, right? All the ladies actually confessed to that one. I was like, I didn't know that, because that's not whatever I ever hear. Anyway, we'll leave that one alone. But I think about these kind of things, right? And now we have this young son, and he's took all his money, and he decides he's going to take off. Now, here's the thing. If you look, the first thing Brother Hay has on your paper is selfishness. People always want and desire what others have, but they never want to work for it. You know, sometimes people look at you and they'll say, well, why can't I have what you have? Well, I don't know. I've been working for 50 years. That's why the things that I have, I've accumulated them over a long period of time, if that makes sense. And how many know some people just don't want to do that anymore? All of a sudden, how many of you have seen people really complaining because they don't have the newest iPhone. Think about that. And somehow they feel really mistreated because they don't have one. Hey, I remember growing up, we didn't even have a telephone in our house. In order to get hold of us, they had to call the neighbor. That was a good thing when I was in school. They always say, we're calling your mom and dad. I would always say, okay. We don't have a phone. Oh, that used to make them so mad. And they'd be like, yes, you do. Yes, I know you got a phone. I said, okay. What's it say on that paper? And they look down and they go, oh, you don't have a phone. Told you. I was smart enough not to say that back then, though, because how many know adults treated kids a lot different than they do now? Wouldn't have been a good thing to say that at that moment. Best to just be quiet and go, sorry, man, we don't have one. But selfishness is an important thing in the world we're living in. I guarantee you that the young person that's involved in all the vandalism in the church is trying to take the pain that he's feeling and by extension apply it to somebody else. I guarantee you. And how many people even here tonight might be hurting and want other people to know how they're hurting, and that's why people react the way they do a lot of times in life. Make sense? How many of you ever been hurting physically, Brother Secretary? Yeah, is that not a true story, though? We always complain until we realize there's people who have it a lot worse. See, Brother Hay understands when I hear young people complaining about not having a cell phone or whatever the case might be, I think about all the places I've been in the world where kids get their food out of dumpsters and out of piles of garbage, and by catching slow dogs. That was what we always used to say in some places. The only dogs around are ones that are skinny and run fast. All the rest of them have already been lunch. It's just how it works. But sometimes we don't appreciate what we have. You know, if we go home at night and we have a roof over our head, believe it or not, you're better off than 90% of the people in the world. Can you imagine living in a South American country? Brother Michael got a little bit of an eye-opener when he went to El Salvador. A lot of them people don't have houses, and when it rains, guess what? Man, I was so mad the other day because I've had a couple leaks in my house. I'm got 50% of it solved, but the other one's still leaking. And so I was so aggravated. But then I start thinking there are a lot of people that they'd be happy with just a couple of leaks. That wouldn't even bother them, right? But I look at that, and sometimes we got to be careful because we sometimes take for granted what we have. And this young guy took for granted what he had at his dad's house. How many know? Because it was there. And we have a little guy stops by our house every day on the way home from school. He's one of Brandon's little friends. And he'll come to the house, and he'll come in, and he'll get a bag of chips and something to drink almost every day. And it's not a big deal. You know, it's like, okay, we don't care. I'm not saying that for any other reason except to say this. You know, Brandon don't even think about that because those things are always readily available for him. Does that make sense? Now, I want you to think about something. Do you know that God is readily available to you if you have a relationship with him? We don't think about that. We can pray. And sometimes it feels like our prayers can only go that high, right? But I promise you something, and you'll see as we go a little bit further in this Bible study, God hears them. God hears your cries, I promise you. As a matter of fact, there's so many times in God's word that it warns us to be careful how we treat somebody, because when they begin to cry out to God in the middle of the night, God will hear their cry. How many know we got to be careful how we treat people? Brother Hayes always cognizant of that fact, because I know We all love the stories when we hear, hey, you can entertain angels unaware and not even know it was an angel. Right? And sometimes we forget that Jesus said when they asked him, hey, when did you ever see you without food? They asked him that. When did we see you naked? When did we see you in jail? When did we see you hurting? When did we see all those lists of things? You remember what Jesus said? When you did those things to the least, you did them unto me. And sometimes we get our perspectives kind of out of whack. And I'm sure this young guy got his perspective out of whack. I already told you the dad's a lot nicer than me. I wouldn't have been that nice. But I will tell you that God treats all of us like that. You know what he says? You have an inheritance of eternal life. Have y'all thought about that? Heaven is our destination if you have a relationship with Christ. And we make fun of this young guy, but how many people walk away from the relationship with the Lord? And how many know that's a whole lot more valuable than anything this world has to offer? And we squander it without realizing it sometimes. And you'll see when we get to the last part of this and get to the final part of this Bible study in a couple of weeks, I want you to understand that God never stops seeking you. You remember what we said for the last month? Jesus came to seek and save those that were lost. How many times have we heard that? How many times has Brother Hayes said to you, look, one person gives their heart to the Lord, all of heaven rejoices. Perspective is hard sometimes. And, you know, I will tell you, and I know Brother Singletary, we talked a little bit today, I'll tell you, you don't appreciate things till you get a little older and you start looking back. And all of a sudden, if you're really honest, you'll see God's hand in your life a lot more than you ever recognized while you're going through it. Does that make sense? See, I have a pretty good connection with his family and his boys and them. And Josh had a little boy. And they took him to Lubbock, and he was in really serious shape. I don't know that Josh ever figured out how serious it was. But I was there the morning they took one of the x-rays of his little chest and held it up and put it up there, and there was no place that wasn't messed up. And I remember talking to Josh, and we prayed, and Josh saying, well, I know the Lord can take care of him. But sometimes I will tell you that the Lord did take care of him. And even though they didn't think he'd come home, he came home. When little Silas shows up at church sometimes in his wheelchair, understand that they took a coffin to the day he was born. They expected to bring that baby home in a coffin. So when you see him wheeling in a wheelchair, now he has some definite challenges in life. Okay? But I'll tell you what, people always say, brother, hey, why would God let something like that happen? Sometimes we forget that we're here to make a difference in people's lives. Sometimes it's to touch them. Sometimes it's to pray for them. Sometimes it's to, man, I know people don't like to hear this, be a simple friend. Right? And you've heard Brother Hay use this illustration a million times. I used to tell Irene after Lester passed away, she'd get so mad and get going and be doing her thing. I mean, she'd get so mad sometimes at dinner, she's just going to walk home. I mean, you know, she's, I don't know, close to 90 back then, probably 80-some years old. She probably couldn't even walk to her house. And I remember going and getting her in my car, and she'd be all mad at me. And she'd say, well, I am useless. I'm worthless. I'm of no value. I should have just died. And I'd always tell her the same thing. I said, you know why you're here? This would make her so mad. It's sort of like with your kids. Sometimes you can really make them mad sometimes, right? Kaylee said, I got that right. I would simply tell her, you know why you're here, Irene? So people like Brother Hay can look out for you. Because God gave me a commandment. And he told me if I have any kind of religion in my life, I prove that by how I treat widows that are really widows indeed. Think about that. And what that's really saying, how do you treat people that can't do anything for you? And I used to tell her all the time, I said, well, you're going to be here as long as God's got to teach me some more stuff. She'd get so mad, I wouldn't even be able to understand, because you all know how she talked. She'd get talking did so fast, I wouldn't even understand anything she said after that. But I knew one thing, that God loved her. I knew that, okay? But we have to make a difference. We have to make choices. I've had people, and Brother Michael, after Brother Hayes stepped down, had people that walked into this church all the time and told us, if you guys get rid of Irene, we'll come to church. And I used to always tell them the same thing. Well, I'm sorry you can't come anymore. But if you think I'm going to get rid of her, you got the wrong guy here. And I'm so thankful Brother Michael never gave in to that pressure either. How many know there are a lot of people like that? I don't know about you, but I want you to think a little bit as we go through the rest of this tonight and for the next few weeks. How many think there are going to be a lot of people in heaven nobody's expecting to be there? How many think there's going to be a lot missing that everybody expects to be there? Now, that's just a Brother Hay opinion. You could take it for what it's worth. But I'm just telling you, Justin, sometimes when I deal with people, I'm like, really? You know, you meet people, and I've had some people of other churches make this statement, Brother Hay, you know the way you believe that you're going to split hell wide open. I said, okay. I don't even get excited about it. See, a lot of you guys in here are third and fourth generation Pentecostal people. Brother Hay is like one of the first generation people. I want you to think about that. 70 years ago, if you were Pentecostal, people didn't look at you the same as they do now. Am I telling the truth? And even more so when your dad was preaching, right? And the adults that paved the way for our churches. Now we have a lot of the largest churches in the world are Pentecostal. How many know people's opinion of us changed? My only problem I have is sometimes we got to be careful because some of us change too. And sometimes we need to be back on the other side of the track so we can get our head on straight. Make sense? Sometimes we kind of get caught up in what the world's caught up in. So just know, but think about this poor young man. He's just being selfish. But his dad gives it to him. It says he never considered what effect his choice would have on others. I want you to share this with you. Sister Hay and I was talking about this morning after I had read my devotions early. Some of us get up earlier than others, and we'll leave that alone. But I'd read my devotion. We were talking about some things. And you know what I told her? I said, isn't it amazing how your decisions impact so many people? Brother Hay got offered a really good job when we were in Las Vegas, Nevada. And Sister Hay already told me how much she hated it here. And I remember thinking, man, I got this job offer about 2 weeks before I ever told her I had orders back here. And matter of fact, the company actually paid me to fly out there and do an interview, do all that kind of stuff. And they looked at me and told me, he said, man, if you'll do this, the salary they offered Brother Hay was about 4 times what I made in the Air Force. It was one of those decision times, Brother Secretary. And I went home and I prayed. And I'm thinking, okay, this is easy. If I take this, we go to California. But even back then, California scared me. Just in case you're wondering. Randy, I know you're from there, so don't take it bad. If somebody's watching, we're on YouTube. I'm sorry, but I'm just telling you, it even scared Brother Hay back then. We took our kids to Disneyland. They were just little, and I won't tell you how old Missy and Donna are, but y'all know they're up there, so it's been a long time ago. I remember going into a Denny's way back then, and the girl waiting on us had purple hair and had a few extra earrings in places. I remember Missy looking at me and saying, Dad. I said, honey, it's a different world. I said, it don't make him a bad person. It's just different here. And they were like overwhelmed by the difference of people at that time in California. I don't know what would happen if we went out there now. It'd even be, whew, I don't even want to know. Okay. But I remember thinking all those things. And after I interviewed and I'm praying and I'm saying, Lord, you got to give me something. But I felt a tug in my heart that said, don't go. And we talked about this morning. Brother Haywood have took that job. I think about this all the time. Donna and Michael wouldn't be where they're at because I had to sign a 5-year contract to take the job. By that time, I'm sure Donna would have met somebody else. Maybe not. You never know. When you're in love, right? Maybe they'd have found each other anyway. I don't know. But it's just one of those kind of things. I mean, they've been that way since they were just little bitty guys, but we'll leave that one alone. And then I got thinking about, we went and had our oldest granddaughter. My oldest daughter went and had her first husband, which turned out to be kind of rough. But you know what? She wouldn't have met her second husband either. And all those kids, I'm sure they would have had other kids, but it wouldn't be those kids. Right? Is Brother Hay telling you the truth? And we talked about, because our son went to youth camp, fell in love, and married somebody he only knew for a couple of weeks. Okay? And we'll just leave that where it is so I don't get in trouble. But I wouldn't have all the grandkids, all of his kids. And now all those kids have kids. I mean, I got more great-grandkids. I can't even figure out the number anymore. I kind of lost track, which is okay. I just worry about the ones that are close by and try to remember their names so I don't get in trouble. And that's the hardest thing. And think about that with me, darling. One decision would have not only changed Sister Hay and I's life forever, but think what it would have done for all our babies. Something to think about. I had never met Brother Singletary. I wouldn't have been here to pray for Josh that time. I wouldn't have been here when Silas was in the hospital. I wouldn't have been here when people were giving us grief. You know, it used to be really funny here when we were in the older building. People would come and want me to pray for them and never come to church. And I used to always tell them, I go, man, okay, because I knew where they went to church. When you live here for a long time, now, Brother Hay's not going to lie to you. I am not in the circle anymore by a long shot. But back then, Brother Hay was. And I knew a lot of people. And I'd ask them, Brother Singletary, how come you're coming here for us to pray for you? I'll never forget what one guy told me. He said, because when I come here to get prayed for, stuff happens. Well, then how come you don't come to our church? Wouldn't it make sense that if you get prayed for and God does something for you, you would stay with the people that prayed with you? Well, the answer is real simple. We weren't uptown. And I know Brother Singletary tells a story. He had problems when Brother Hay preached that message a long time ago about being a church full of misfits. And I didn't mean it in a bad way. Brandon had a bad day at school, and we talked about that this morning, how words have different meanings to different people and how we go different places. That was not what Brother Hay intended by anything when I was preaching that message. What I was saying is we all have issues in our life, right? And so all of a sudden we have this stuff going on and we can't figure out where we're headed. I got to be honest with you, okay? One decision that you make, if you're here at church, please hear Brother Hay. I tell parents this all the time. You want to give your kids hope, don't you ever give up. Period. End of story. Okay? I don't care how mad you get at the preacher. I don't care how mad you get at God. I don't care how angry you get about your circumstances. If you give up, you just caused your children to lose hope. And sometimes you just got to kind of power through things. And I think about that one simple decision, okay, how it would have impacted so many lives. One decision. And we got to pray and ask God to guide us. But we also, how many know we can't be selfish, and we need to look at how our decisions impact other people. You know, how our church handles this young man is going to be very vital. How many know God can take care of all the finance side of it? But hey, don't ever worry about money on that. God always finds a way. Like sometimes I've had to work a couple of jobs. Sometimes I had to sell peanuts in town with somebody. Sometimes I had to sell watermelons with them just to get enough money to buy a starter to fix my truck. But God always provided. Not necessarily the way I want it. How many think it would be a lot better if it just kind of fell out of the sky? Or if somebody that had a whole bunch, Brother Randy just walked up and said, hey, man, I want to help you out. Here's a check. That'd be good, huh? I saw an article the other day where that guy won like $1.67 million in a lottery, and he ended up in jail the same day. Did some dumb things. Now, by the time he gets out of jail and takes care of that issue, I'm sure most of that would be tied up with the lawyers, right? Can I tell you, money never solves an issue. And I just want to share that with you. Don't get caught up in that. But you got to begin to consider how your choices impact others. And this young guy, he was living for the moment. And I think about that all the time. Sometimes living for the moment isn't always a bad thing. But in most cases, you got to think about the next moment. Okay? I know this is going to sound dumb to use this illustration. How many ever saw the Mickey Mouse cartoon where Mickey and Minnie get each other Christmas presents? Anybody in here ever seen that? I think Mickey, she buys him a case for his harmonica, and I forget what he bought her. But anyway, they both sold those possessions in order to buy the other person the gift. And sometimes I think if we could get past the moment, right, of thinking about ourselves, we miss a lot of opportunities in life. Because sometimes all you need to do to bless somebody is smile. Put your arm around them. Let them know you love them. Let them know that God loves them. Let them know that it's not the end of the world just because they messed up. Okay? If you're waiting for somebody to mess up, trust me, you can stand in line behind Brother. Hey, I got a whole list. A lot of things in my life, but I trust God to take care of them because he said he would. Right? So just know that and just understand. But here's the one that really gets me, and I want you to think about this. A lot of times, separation is a direct result of selfishness. And how many families are separated because one person or the other wanted their own way? Think about that. Not willing to compromise. Not willing to work with somebody. And isn't that what the enemy tries to do all the time? He tries to tell us, hey, God don't love you. If he loved you, here's what he should be doing. And he does his best to separate us from God. And we lose sight of heaven. We lose sight of eternity. And all of a sudden, if we're not careful, we lose sight of all the great things God does for us in our life. And you know what breaks Brother Hayes' heart? How many times I've been with people and watched God perform miracles for them. And a year later, you don't ever see them until the next crisis. And then you'll see them. And then the next time might be 5 years before you see them because that's the next crisis. How many think God wants us to love them before the crisis gets here? Right? How about loving our kids before the crisis gets here? You know, lots of times I look back and so much separation between people is simply because one person or the other being selfish. There are people who say, well, I'm not going to ever be with you because you don't believe the way I do. Or, hey, I already told you, I've been told those kind of things so many times. I quit worrying about it a long time ago. I'll be in a lot of trouble, Justin, if any of those guys get to pick up the first rock. I'm just telling you. But guess what? I know who holds that control, and his name is Jesus. And how many know when they tried to pick up rocks over the girl that was taken in adultery, Jesus stepped in the middle of it. And guess what I know? He'll take care of the rocks for me. All I got to do is have faith in him and trust him. And it's not easy. Look, life is never going to be easy. We just have that kind of false impression. But I think about how many times people are separated from friends. People are separated from moms and dads, and children are separated from their parents or grandparents or whatever the case might be because they're selfish. Well, you give them more than you give me. Okay. Man, I get in trouble all the time. And you all know Sister Annie and I have a lot of adopted kids. And our biological kids a lot of times would be jealous over them. And I'd be telling them, sort of, okay. and we'll find out a little later on in this illustration. Because the older one that's going to be his issue. And how many know it's not what somebody does for you that proves whether or not they love you? It's about them just being there and not being selfish and wanting their own way. Well, if you don't believe like I do, and I hate to use this illustration, but it's a true one. We had a couple that were pastoring the Clovis church once, and Berhe used to work with them a lot. And it was an older lady, and she said some really ugly things one time, and I told her, I said, whoa, you need to back up a little bit. And she made the statement that if one of her kids were gay, and we all know what that means, that they'd never be welcome in her house, and she'd be more than happy to take them out of this world. And I'm looking at her going, Brother Randy, really? And all of a sudden, I begin to think about how far has the enemy separated people? How many know there are a lot of people that have issues? I'm not going to ever say that lifestyle's good. Don't get Berhe and all that stuff. What I'm telling you is a lot of times we got to be careful, because how many know if the spotlight's turned into our life, right, we're going to be in just as much trouble as they are. And I heard something today that kind of got my attention. And one of the things that they said was, love, unless it's tethered to the truth, will always get you into a bad situation. And I thought about that. How many know that sometimes you got to tell somebody, and here's the illustration that preacher used. He said if you have congestive heart failure and you have your liver is failing, and the doctor comes in and says, just keep drinking and smoking, it'll be all right. Is he really doing you a service or a disservice? Have you ever thought about it? The truth of the matter is that if you love somebody, sometimes you have to be truthful. But we should never be truthful at the expense of loving somebody. I know that don't make sense to a lot of people, but how many know there are some people that want to tell you the truth about all your faults, but man, they never turn the light on their own life. They tell you about all your shortcomings, right? They're quick. And I know there's parents in here who have grown kids. We've all heard it. Well, you never did anything for me. I always think, really? Okay, well, I got up and went to work every day. That's got to count for something, right? Kaylee said no. And I did a funeral for somebody one time for a family. I knew the dad very well. His wife was really sick. She'd been sick for a long time. And this guy was very highly educated. And you know where he worked? At one of the wrecking yards in Clovis. You know why he took that job? It's the only job he could take and take care of her. And his kids were so ugly to him. And I remember when he passed away, some of the ugly things that they said. And I knew him personally. Okay? And I told those kids, I said, what you don't understand is he got up every day and went to a job that he was way overqualified for. But Brother Randy, he went every day. I'm sure he took a lot of abuse from a lot of people. But he was willing to do that because of the love he had for their mom. Think about that. And so, again, selfishness is what causes separation. Well, I'm going to go do this because I can, and I'm not going to worry about how that decision impacts anybody else. You know, it's sort of like being a grandparent, and next thing you know, you got the kids 24/7, and you have to say to the child, wait a minute, time out. These are your kids, right? And Brother Hayes not being mean. And sometimes we have to remind them, hey, you're mom and dad. Boy, people don't like to hear that one, do they? Okay? But by the other side of that, I love being a grandpa because, never mind, I'm going to behave because I only get to enjoy those a little bit. But the righteous living on this, the world will always be there for you, and they'll be happy till the money runs out. And we talked about that a little bit last week. But here's number 3. When he'd spent all that he had, there arose a famine in the land, and he began to be in want. I promise you the spiritual destitution, if you look on your paper, famine of self-worth, meaning in life and purpose, and a lack of direction. How many people, and maybe you've even said this, what am I doing here? What is my purpose? And I look at these things, and we're out of time, but I want you to think with Brother Hay for just a moment. You have a purpose. Your meaning in life has to come from something a lot bigger than you. How many notice how all the kids ran to Tasha and Justin tonight? There's a reason for that. And no matter what they do, I promise you, you'll never get away from that. Okay? Brother Hay still runs into people that call me by name, and I'm going, I have no idea who this is. I try to do what I used to do in the Air Force. I started looking for a name tag. Man, that caused me a lot of grief because people don't wear name tags, right? In the military, I'd have to worry about memorizing names. They had it on their shirt. All I had to do was add sergeant, airman, or whatever, colonel, whatever it is, right? Better never ever call a colonel like that. You'll get in a lot of trouble. Just say sir and you'll be okay. But I look at this, Brother Singletary, and in my little feeble mind, I want to share this with you so it'll make sense to you tonight. You have meaning in this life. Every decision you make will not just impact you. Okay? Sometimes we all make decisions. And how many of us have thought, man, if I could go back and redo that one? Okay? Be careful what you wish for. Because how many know sometimes the way it would have played out was not the way that it was ever intended? And here's where I get excited, and I'll close with this. I believe this with all my heart. God said that he wants us to have a good life, right? And he promises to lead and guide and direct us. So if we get off on the wrong path or we're going the wrong direction, how many think God knows how to turn us around? If Brother Hay would have ended up in California, I believe with all my heart something would have happened. You know what I found out a year later? That company went bankrupt. Man, I've been stuck out there thinking with the 5-year contract going, now what am I going to do? And living with people that I just probably not equal to. Does that make sense? And Sister Ray always laughs at me. When I go to Texas, I'm always at home. I know that probably sounds strange. When I come here to New Mexico, this is home. We've been here for so long. This is home. No matter wherever we go. Yeah, I know I was born in Florida. I know all my history. I know Sister Hay come from Illinois, all that kind of stuff. And we spent a lot of time separated from our parents. But I'm so thankful that Doris's parents the last 20 years got to be here with us. And we were in a place where we could help them. You know what Brother Hay thinks about? There would be no way that her daddy would have came to California. That would have never happened. And I'm so thankful I was in a place for my mom that I could make sure she was taken care of. And you might say, well, Brother Hay, I don't even like what I'm going through right now. How many know we need to be able to have a little bit of glimpse over into eternity? And there used to be a song, and it's called Thank You. I can't remember the guy who sings it. Somebody, you younger ones, well, maybe older younger ones will remember. But it's a song called Thank You. And what it's about is talking to this person and people coming to him and saying, thank you for giving the money to the missionary. And because of you, that's why I'm here. And a young man coming and saying, thank you for being that Sunday school teacher. That's why I'm here. And all of a sudden, people begin to come to that person in heaven, telling them thank you, because the reason they're in heaven is because of what that person did in his life. But I guarantee you, when you're going through this life, that's the last thing you think about sometimes, because the enemy wants us separated from God, separated from each other, right? Focused on this moment, focused on our own needs and wants. And whenever we're in them circumstances, a lot of times that's when we get in trouble. That makes sense? And I'm not going to ever tell you that life is easy. It's never easy. And there's been a lot of things that sometimes you wonder, why in the world, God, would you put me in this place? And then every once in a while, it's like this older lady that called me the other day. I shouldn't say older. She might be the same age as Brother Hay. I don't know. But anyway, she had given me a message to come see her. I hate to say this. I did not recognize her. She knew who I was. She knew my kids. I'm like, okay. Sometimes when you get old, that happens. But you know what I thought about, Justin? If Brother Hay wasn't here, she was struggling, I wouldn't have been able to go and pray with her. And when I prayed with her for those few moments, you know what struck me, Sister Darlene? I think about all your grandkids and when they show up and we can get our arms around them. Not near enough like we should, but it's not because we don't want to, right? But we learned that when they are here, we do our best. And Brother Hay is telling you, you make a bigger difference than what you think. That smile you give somebody might be the only smile they ever see. That time you put your arm around them and tell them that you care about them might be the only time they ever hear that. That's your purpose. That's what gives meaning to life. And those are eternal meanings that will outlive your presence in this life. Make sense? If you would, go ahead and stand with me. We'll be dismissed. I'm sorry I got a little long-winded. If you have an offering, we'll put them in one basket so I don't get in trouble. But if you have offering, you can just put it in the basket. Kaylee will come take care of that and give me grief about it. But I'm so glad that you're here tonight. Please pray for this young man. Pray for his mom. Pray for the whole circumstance. How many know, help this be a time where we can make a difference? Okay? Not saying just to let things go, but make a difference. Think about your choices tomorrow. Think about your choice tonight. Before you go to sleep, make the choice to spend just a couple of minutes with the Lord. It's not how long you spend. It's about spending. Just being there for a minute. And take a minute to pray and seek him. And I promise you, you'll start seeing big changes in your life. Let's pray. Father, thank you for opportunity to share your word tonight. Lord, first and foremost, I thank you for each one that is here. Lord, I thank you for each life. Father, I pray, wrap your arms around them. Lord, let them feel your presence. And most of all, Lord, let them know that you're walking this journey with them. Keep your hand upon them. In Jesus' name we ask it. Amen.